All right, so let's take a look at the next piece of our historical and archaeological evidence. These are the processions of Amu, right? And what you'll see is from this man, look at the pointer, from this man on, these guys were considered Canaanites, right? This guy and this guy, these are Egyptians. Egyptians, right? From here on, Canaanites. So let's look at this historical evidence and see if it matches up with the Bible. Early contacts between Egypt and the Levant during the reign of Senusr II around 1890 BC. Parties of Western Asiatic foreigners visiting the pharaoh with gifts are recorded, as in the tomb paintings of 12th dynasty official Khunen-Hotep II. These foreigners, possibly Canaanites or nomads, are labeled as Amu, including the leading man with a Nubian ibex labeled as Abisha the Hyksos, the first known instance of the name Hyksos. So at the time they called these people, they called them the Hyksos. These are the Egyptians. We're going to continue to look at further evidence of why that's important and proving that these are the Israelites. But look at these ethnic features: brown skin, woolly hair, beards. Brown skin, woolly hair, afro hair, beards. And look at the sisters back here, right? Look at the sisters back here. So let's continue to look on at this piece of evidence. Let's match it up with the Bible. Genesis 46:31 through 34. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, my brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. So understand, look, the Israelites, right, the sons of Jacob, were from the land of Canaan. Remember, that's the same promise that was given unto Jacob. These depictions, as noted in historical evidence, these are possibly depicting Canaanites coming down into Egypt. But let's just keep going if you don't believe. And the men are shepherds. There's shepherds. They got cattle with them, right? They got cattle and donkeys with them, right? For their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. Look at these guys. They're bringing their cattle, right? They got the men. They've got their children on these donkeys. They got some provisions and tools and stuff on these donkeys, and their women in the back with another child right here. And look at their ethnic features, right? Let's continue to match this up with the Bible. And it shall come to pass when Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, what is your occupation? That you shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen. For every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So shepherds, right, people who were known to be over cattle and to take care of cattle, they're an abomination unto the Egyptians, according to the Bible. And we're going to continue to look at that through historical evidence and prove that these are depictions of the Israelites indeed within Egypt. Right? Let's continue. So we have to understand that our last piece of historical evidence, right, the processions of Amu, are depicting the Canaanite people going down into Egypt, right? And this is around that same time period that we said the Israelites would have been going into Egypt. Go back and watch the video. The reason why it's important for us to isolate time periods is to understand true biblical chronology, and so that we can precisely examine the evidence that's taking place, because the Bible would be matching up the stories and the depictions that's going on in real history. The Bible is a real history book. This is not fairy tale. So let's look at the Hyksos people. That's what the previous piece of archaeological evidence said it was depicting. The Hyksos people with their cattle, their women, their children, and all that they have going into Egypt. So let's watch this, right? And this is from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology. The Hyksos evidence of Jacob's family in ancient Egypt. Jacob's family, the Israelites, right? To the right here is where the source is. A fairly standard view is that the Hyksos migrants themselves eventually adopted this as their official dynastic title while in Egypt. Hyksos, right? Candarala's article defining the Hyksos, a reevaluation of the title Hyksos and its implication for Hyksos identity. Josephus, right? This is an ancient Jewish historian, right? You can look into him, very prominent. For his part, quoting Manetho asserts this name to mean shepherd kings. Why is that important? It lines up exactly with the Bible. For the exact same time period, the Bible said that the shepherds would be coming from Canaan, right? Joseph told his brethren to let Pharaoh know that they are shepherds from Canaan. This is exactly what this historical evidence is showing. Let's keep going. For this time against Apion, this whole nation was styled Hyksos, that is, shepherd kings, for their first syllable high, according to the sacred dialect, denotes a king, as in sos, a shepherd. But this, according to the ordinary dialect, and these compound hiskos, right? So, the standard modern interpretations of the name hiskos among Egyptologists is as foreign kings rather than shepherd kings, right? So, modern Egyptologists want to say that they are not known as shepherd kings, they're known as foreign kings, despite what the depictions themselves are showing. But that's fine. Let's see what the ancient historian Josephus had to say. They take Josephus to have misinterpreted the word, even though Josephus is a closer source to that time period, but still expressing the non-native nature of these rulers, meaning that they came from another area, possibly Canaan. Still, whatever the case, the ancient Egyptian historian Manetho, whose work now lost, is quoted by Josephus, described these people chiefly as a shepherding population. Again, from Josephus quoting Manetho directly. Let's read here. But Manetho goes on, these people who have before named kings and called shepherds also, and their descendants, right, like the children of Israel, us and our fathers also, is what they said, were told to say unto Pharaoh, as he says, kept possession of Egypt, right? The Israelites, right, the sons of Jacob would have dwelled in the land of Goshen. Why? Because all these shepherds were an abomination to the Egyptians, right? So they would have had their own possession and their own dwelling in Egypt. This historical evidence matches up with the Bible. He says that the kings of Thebes and other parts of Egypt made an insurrection against the shepherds. So that means that the pharaohs at one point came and they took over the shepherding people. Why is that important? Because at some point during the Israelites dwelling within Egypt, a new pharaoh who did not know Joseph came over and said, let us deal shrewdly, let's deal wickedly with these Israelites because they're outnumbering us, they're outgrowing us, right? This is historical evidence matching up the Hyksos people with the Israelites, right? And the Egyptians got tired of the Hyksos people. They were starting to outnumber them, outgrow them, and outproduce them, right? Now, Manetho in another book of his says that this nation, thus called shepherds, were also called captives in their sacred books, right? The Israelites were held captives to the Egyptians. And this account of his is the truth. For feeding of sheep was the employment of our forefathers in the most ancient ages. This is crazy. So, even despite these modern-day Egyptologists wanting to disagree with Josephus, let's see what PBS, right, the educational organization has to say about what Josephus says. Is Josephus a primary source, right? As historians of the ancient world, Josephus is our primary source for reconstructing history in the late Second Temple period and in the time of Jesus and in the 1st century. Josephus is our Bible. He is our map. So PBS would be agreeing with Josephus about these people being shepherd kings. If you look here, what was on the depictions of the processions of Amu, you saw this picture. This is a crown and this is a staff denoting kings and shepherding, right? Shepherd kings. These are found in the hieroglyphs in Egypt over these people that we saw on the last piece of historical evidence, right? So Flavius Josephus was a Roman Jewish historian and military leader, best known for writing the Jewish War. He was born in Jerusalem, then part of the Roman province of Judea, to a father of priestly descent and a mother who claimed royal ancestry, right? So he lived and was born around 37 AD, right? This is a closer witness to what have been going on in the oral history of what happened than these modern day Egyptologists. But let's continue. So again, I mean, this is pretty interesting, right? This is pretty interesting. Let's look again at the processions of Amu, right? Here's the symbol over the first man that they said he was the first man in front of the line, right? Abisha the Hisko, right? Look at this symbol, the crown symbol and the staff, shepherding kings from here on, right? Here on. Look at that, right? Look at what Joseph told his people to say unto Pharaoh. Now let's read Genesis 45:20-25. Also regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. And the children of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provisions for the way. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave three 300 pieces of silver, and 5 changes of raiment. And to his father he sent after this manner 10 asses. Now, asses are donkeys, right? This is important. If the Israelites would have been coming down into Egypt, right, to dwell back again with Joseph and to be saved from the famine, there would be donkeys and cattle and provisions with them on the way according to the Bible. Look at this piece of historical and archaeological evidence. The men, the children, donkeys carrying provisions, and cattle. And this is in the same biblical chronology, right? The same time period that the Israelites would have been going down into Egypt. This is a brown-skinned people with woolly and afro hair, and they have beards. They have beards. Look at this. This is, they're trying to hide this evidence from you. They're hiding the correct time period from you so you don't get to see the ethnic features of these people and line it up with the Bible. Look at this, donkeys, the asses, carrying provisions and the children and the things that they need down into Egypt. This is what the historical evidence is showing, and this is what the Bible has to say about that exact same time period. So if you want to say these aren't the Israelites, hey man, you don't believe in the Bible. You just kind of don't believe in the Bible. This story is way too similar. These depictions are way too accurate to what would have been going on in this story right here. Let's continue. All right, so now we have a piece of evidence around the time period that the Israelites would have been exiting Egypt, or closer to the time period the Israelites would have been exiting Egypt, right? Towards the end, around, which would have been around 1447, right? Let's look at the evidence, right? I told you earlier that there was a pharaoh that we have in this documentary. We have a pharaoh who is going to be talking about his frustrations with these Asiatic people, right? It called the Asiatic people the Hyksos, right? And when we match the Hyksos up, we find that those to be the Israelites entering into Egypt at the same time period the Bible places the Israelites entering into Egypt. So again, the Bible said that at some point a new pharaoh came along that did not know Joseph, and his goal was to put the Israelites into subjugation, to overtake the shepherding people, right? The Israelites were shepherding people, to overtake the shepherding people, to put them into slavery and to put them into bondage because they started to outnumber the Egyptians. That's the Bible. Now, let's look at historical evidence, right? Historical evidence, right? This is the inscription of Kamos, right? This is the inscription of that pharaoh that I was telling you about, and it comes from around 1550 BC, right? Around 100 plus solar years before the Israelites would have exited Egypt, right? That means this would have been around the time that they would have been subjugated. Let's look at this piece of evidence before we read the translation of what this says. Let's look at who translated, right? This is James B. Pritchard, who translated this Carnarvon tablet, this piece of historical evidence. Let's look at, some of his accolades. James Bennett Pritchard was an American archaeologist whose work explicited the interrelationships of the religions of ancient Palestine, Canaan, Egypt, Assyria, and Babylon, right? All those places the Israelites dwelt at the time. Pritchard was honored with the Gold Medal Award for Distinguished Archaeological Achievement in 1983 from the Archaeological Institute of America. So you can read more about this prestigious guy, right? He's pretty prestigious, so, listen to what he has to say, this translation says, right? Let me understand what this strength of mine is for. One prince is in Avaris, right? We'll find out that Avaris is the land of Goshen that the Israelites dwelled in because they were shepherds, right? And the Egyptians didn't like shepherds to be around them. Let's continue. Another is in Ethiopia, and here I sit associated with an Asiatic, the Hyksos, and a Negro. Interesting. This is very interesting. Negroes in ancient Egypt, and Pharaoh is frustrated with them? Why is Pharaoh frustrated with Asiatics and Negroes in Egypt? Let's see what Pharaoh has to say. Each man has his slice of this Egypt, dividing up the land with me. That's interesting. According to the Bible in this time period, It would have been the Egyptians with their land, and the Israelites had their land separate from the Egyptians in the land of Goshen, right? The Egyptians put them off to the side because they were shepherds. This is very interesting that in this same specific time period, the Pharaoh is saying that his land is divided with Negroes. And if you do a simple Google search, Google will try to tell you that Negroes weren't in ancient Egypt. That's interesting. James B. Pritchard does not agree. Pharaoh Khamos does not agree. History, archaeology, and prophecy does not agree. Negroes were indeed in ancient Egypt. And they were depicted and noted as having a piece of the land of Egypt, much like the Israelites would have had a piece in the land of Egypt. That is not conjecture to say that. This is evidence. Let's continue, right? I cannot pass by him as far as Memphis, the waters of Egypt, but behold, he has Hermopolis. No man can settle down, being despoiled by the imposits of the Asiatics. So it is, again, it is calling the Negroes and Asiatics the same thing. Asiatics, I will grapple with them, that I may cut open his belly. My wish is to save Egypt and to smite the Asiatics. These people that he's frustrated with. These people that he's frustrated with. Also denoted as the Hyksos. Let's continue. Let's just look at this evidence. The Carnarvon tablet is an ancient Egyptian inscription in the hieratic recording to the defeat of the Hyksos by Khamos. So again, this evidence calling out Asiatics and Negroes as being the people that Pharaoh is mad at and wants to take over and wants to destroy because they're becoming too much for him and they've got a piece of his land, right? This piece of evidence is about the Hyksos. That's what we just looked at. That's what we just looked at. So those brown-skinned people with woolly hair and afro hair, those were Negroes according to evidence. That is not conjecture. That's not me adding that. That is pure history, lining up with the Bible. And if this time period is indeed true, then Negroes are depicted on the walls of ancient Egypt being the Israelites. But let's continue. Let's just continue. The evidence will continue to speak for itself, brothers and sisters. Yes, it will. All praises to the Lord, right? So it was discovered in 1908 by Lord Carnarvon. It consists of 2 wooden tablets covered in stucco and fine plaster. The tablet, believed to be a schoolboy's exercise, contains a text that has been proven to be historically significant. Why aren't they teaching the Negro today that he's depicted on the walls of ancient Egypt as being the same people called Hyksos, a shepherding people that the Bible calls the Israelites, that the Bible calls the sons of Jacob, the ones that received the promise of God? Interesting. The Carnarvon tablet was found near the entrance of the tomb in Deir el Bahari Valley, initially thought to be dated in the 17th dynasty of Egypt, right? It is now attributed to the early 18th dynasty, right? So just remember and check the time periods that we've already established for the time that the Israelites would have dwelled in Egypt, right? Let's continue. Again, let's remember that the Israelites, right, were told by Joseph, right? They were told to say unto Pharaoh that they were shepherds. Why? Because the Egyptians despised shepherds and wanted to put them off in a separate land, right? So what is that land that I just mentioned that they would have had, right? The land that, according to evidence, would have been Negroes, Asiatics, right? Negroes, they would have had a piece of Pharaoh's land, and he was pretty mad about it, right? He was pretty mad about it. Let's look at the land of Goshen, right? The land of Goshen, that's where the Israelites were, the piece of land that they were given by Pharaoh, right? The land of Goshen is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as an area in Egypt that was allotted to the Hebrews by Pharaoh during the time of Joseph, right? We read that. They dwelt in Goshen up until the time of the Exodus. So up until the time of the Exodus, from their getting there to the time of the Exodus, that's where they were at. When they left Egypt, it is believed to have been located in the eastern Nile Delta, Lower Egypt, perhaps at or near Avaris, the seat of power of the Hyksos kings, the shepherd kings. The shepherding people in this exact same time period were called the children of Israel, the Israelites, the sons of Jacob. And the historical evidence says that that's Asiatics, also known as Negroes. And we saw that depicted with the brown skin, the afro to woolly hair, right? And it matched the exact story of the Bible. Okay, so the land of Goshen is mentioned in the books of Genesis and in Exodus, right? So now, what's important about this? This is associated with the land that the Hyksos were in charge of, the land that the Hyksos dwelt in. And when we look at some DNA evidence later, right, the DNA evidence says that the bones of the people in this land are Negroid bones, right? They are the descendants and ancestors of modern day Negroes that dwelt in the area that the Israelites, also known as the Hyksos, would have dwelt in, right? So let's look at Britannica. Hyksos, the Egyptian dynasty. Hyksos, dynasty of Palestinian origin that ruled northern Egypt as the 15th dynasty from 1630 to 1530, right? We saw that evidence. The name Hyksos was used by the Egyptian historian Manetho. We read that evidence from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, who, according to Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, translated the word as king shepherds or captive shepherds. Josephus himself wished to demonstrate that the great antiquity of the Jews and thus identified the Hyksos with the Hebrews of the Bible. So it calls the Hyksos the Israelites of the Bible, according to this famous Roman Jewish historian, very accredited, very famous, right? Modern scholarship has identified most of the Hyksos kings' names as being Shemitic, right? So why is that important? The Israelites descend from Shem. That's the Semitic groups of people. So the names that these people had, the names that these Negroes had in this area, in this land, were Semitic, right? So clearly these people did indeed descend from the same line of people that the Israelites descended from, according to history. History. So was there a black presence in ancient Egypt despite what a simple Google search might lead you to believe? What do those depictions from the civilizations themselves show you? I will let you decide, right? You decide for yourself. I'm here to give you the evidence and to show you the Bible. This is a pure review, right? What do scholars around the 16th, 17th, and 18th, and 19th century AD after the death of Christ have to say about African Negro ancestry? That's what we're going to examine now. Let's see if it's true. Were Negroes actually in ancient Egypt? Could they indeed have been the people of God according to that evidence? Is there anything that supports that? Are there maps? Is there personal evidence? Is there cultural evidence? What? Let's just see. Let's just see. Why we wouldn't be here for any reason. All right. So despite what modern Google search might want you to believe, we're going to prove that not only do scholars associate Negroes in ancient Egypt as potentially being the Israelites, they also depict them as potentially being a large percentage and a large population of the Egyptians themselves. And that also matches the Bible. Why? Because the Pharaoh of that time, according to the Bible, said that the Israelites, the children of Israel, had outnumbered them. So that means they would have taken over and they filled the land. Let's look at the contributions of the Negro to human civilization by Alexander Francis Chamberlain, PhD and assistant professor of anthropology at Clark University. The contributions of the Negro to human civilization are innumerable and immemorial, right? Let us first get some glimpses of him chiefly as an individual in contact with the past of other cultures than his own. Ancient Egypt knew him, both bond and free. Remember, the Israelites were bond, right? They were captive, and at one time they were free. Then you also had the Israelites that were bond in the time of Moses, while Moses was free, raised in the house of Pharaoh. Go read the book of Genesis and go read the book of Exodus. And his blood flowed in the veins of not a few of the mighty pharaohs. So this is saying that Negro ancestry and Negro blood is seen amongst the Egyptians, right? In the bond people and the free people in ancient Egypt. If this is that same time period, which it is, right? We're about to mention the 18th dynasty, right? Around 1700 BC. This same time period where the Hyksos are dwelling, look at the marker, the Hyksos were dwelling. This same exact time period, is saying that Negro blood is present. That matches the Carnarvon tablet. That matches what is stated about Negroes being the one that Pharaoh was upset with, right? And would have subjugated him and made him both bond and free, right? Let's continue. Nefertari, the famous queen of Ames, the king of Egypt, who drove the Hyksos from the land and founded the 18th dynasty, was a negress of great beauty, strong personality, and remarkable administrative ability. If you continue to read here, you can pause. You can pause and continue to read on down about some Negro history. Now let's look at page 484. Right. Let's look at what it has to say. Besides these marked individual instances, there is in fact the Egyptian race itself in general had a considerable element of Negro blood, and one of the prime reasons why no civilization of the type of that of the Nile arose in other parts of the continent. If such a thing were at all possible, was that Egypt acted as a sort of channel by which the genus of Negro land. Now keep that in mind. We're gonna continue to look at Negro land as we go throughout this documentary. Negro land was drafted off into the service of Mediterranean and Asiatic culture. So again, more evidence that Negroes are Asiatics. They are the Asiatics depicted in other pieces of historical evidence. In this sense, Egyptian civilization may be said in some respects to be of Negro origin among the Semitic peoples, whose civilization were so numerous and so ancient on the shores of the Mediterranean and throughout Western Asia. The Negro, as in Egypt, made his influence felt from the lowest to the highest walks of life, sometimes as a slave, sometimes as the freest of citizens, as cupbearer or confidential advisor. Okay, so if that evidence is true, that means there would have been a Negro who became vizier in Egypt. According to the Bible, the only Hyksos that would have been a vizier in Egypt would be Joseph. So Joseph also is associated with Negro ancestry. That's very interesting. That's not conjecture. That's the evidence that we've been reviewing so far. He stood next to kings and princes as a faithful eunuch. He enhanced and extended the power of the other sex in lands where custom confined them to the four walls of their dwellings or restricted the utmost their appearance and their actions in public. And women from Ethiopia, black but comely, were wives, right? Wives of favorite slaves of stirrups and kings, often were the real rulers of Oriental provinces and empires, right? So you can continue to pause and look on at what this has to say. But understand that Moses, right, who would have been a highly touted Israelite during his time period, he married an Ethiopian woman, right? He married an Ethiopian woman. And you can read about that in the book of Exodus. You can also continue to read about and double check my sources, double check this anthropologist, Alexander Francis Chamberlain. I'll let you do that. I'm here to give you proper evidence. You can go back and continue to search for the, just proof. All right, let's get it. So why are sources from about 150 years ago discussing that there was indeed a Negro presence in ancient Egypt? Why, right? Not only Egypt, but as well as other places the Israelites have been slaves. So let's read this. Good grief, guys. That's how you know I've been getting into a lot of sources. On the physical and mental characteristics of the Negro by John Crawford, right? This is the Transactions of the Ethnological Society of London. This source comes from around 1866, right? So, within or towards the end of the transatlantic slave trade officially, right? Published by the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland, right? So the African Negro possesses a combination of qualities which distinguish him from the rest of mankind. These consist of physical strength and capacity of enduring toil with docility and submissiveness. Now remember that that's very interesting, because the Bible said that the more that the Egyptians afflicted them in hard bondage, the stronger they grew and the more numerous that they grew. This is saying that the African Negro possessed those same qualities that line up with the Bible. But let's just keep reading. It is this combination that has provoked and encouraged the more highly endowed races to reduce him to bondage in all known ages down to our own. For Negroes have always been, as they still are, slaves to Egyptians, to Persians, to Turks, and to Arabs, right? So right now we're looking at Egyptian evidence, right? And in the future videos to come, we'll talk about the Israelites and in their slave trades and their captivities that they had under the Persians, the Turks, and the Arabs, right? From the Babylonian to the Assyrian to the Persian and the Media dynasties, right? Where the Israelites were taken as captives. You can read about that. You can read about that throughout Kings. You can read that in the book of Ezra. We're going to examine it further in more videos, but I want you to pay attention to the evidence at hand. What this is saying here is that Negroes have always been slaves. There's been a presence of Negro slavery in all of these lands. These are the same lands the Israelites were known to be slaves at. That is not conjecture. That is pure historical evidence, and that is according to the evidence we see even published by the Royal Anthropological Institute of Great Britain and Ireland in 1866. So again, this matches up what we're seeing in pure archaeological evidence. This matches up with historians, what they were saying around even up to 200 years ago. They were agreeing that there was indeed Negro presence in ancient Egypt, right? Let's continue. All right, before we go more into this evidence, let's just discuss what a Negro is, and let's discuss what we've kind of been through so far. Negroid features, according to renowned anthropologists, ethnologists, and archaeologists, are that of black to brown skin, thick lips, and curly, woolly hair. The term Negro or Negroid historically relates to an aspect of physical and genealogical features from a scholarly aspect. We cannot assert any more or any less, and we won't. In terms of relating Negro features to that of ancient and modern ethnological Israelites, we must examine the Bible in order to trace the various locations and experiences of the ancient Israelites in order to determine if we can find a Negro presence in those very same locations. As far as Egypt goes, it can be asserted that a Negroid presence did indeed exist within the 1877 to the 1447 BCE period of Egypt, the same period that the Israelites would have dwelt in Egypt. We have that evidence, and we have shown it, right? And there's more, right? Understand that for time constraints, I can't add every single piece of evidence in this video alone. But like, share, subscribe, and we will continue to go through this evidence. I promise you, right? Our review of the research so far has revealed the Israelites, to some extent, must have left Egypt with Negroid features, right? Because historians were saying that Negro blood was found amongst the ancient Egyptians, both bond and free, of the same time period that we lined up with the Israelites being within Egypt. So if the Bible is true and history is true, which I hope you believe in both, I think that's why you're watching this video, then the ancient Israelites would have left Egypt with a Negroid presence. And God told Jacob, who he named to Israel, that he would make a nation of him in Egypt. What does that mean? So a nation of Negroid people came out of Egypt as God's chosen people. That is not conjecture. That is evidence. We're just looking at evidence, right? Let's look at let's continue to look at, I got this from Wikipedia, but it's quoting the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? The Encyclopedia Britannica 11th edition lists the following well-defined characteristics of the Negroid populations of Africa, southern India, Malaysia, and Australia. A dark skin varying from dark brown, reddish brown, or chocolate to nearly black. Dark, tight, curled hair, flat and transverse section of the woolly or the frizzly type. A greater or less tendency to prognathism. Eyes dark brown with yellowish cornea. Nose more or less broad and flat, and large teeth. The Encyclopedia Britannica sees a tendency toward a tall stature, right? Long-headedness, with the exception of the Negritos, who are described as showing short stature, right? So, forensic anthropologists writing around the turn of the millennium described Negroid skulls as having a broad and brown nasal cavity, no dam or nasal sill. I'm not going to read that word. Nasal bones, notable facial projection in the jaw and mouth of prognathism, a rectangular shaped palate, a square rectangular eye orbit, right? And so on and so forth. So these are the features that would have been coming out of ancient Egypt, right? Let's continue. All right, so we only switched over to the Wikipedia and the Encyclopedia Britannica just so I could prove to you that this source from 1866 is the same thing that modern scholars are also saying about Negroes, right? This is the same source on the physical and mental characteristics of the Negro. Let's just make sure that modern what modern and scholastical evidence is saying is the same as what this is saying about 200 years ago, right? More or less. Okay, right. By the term Negro, in so far at least as it is applicable to Africa, we understand a human being with the hair of the head and the other parts of the body always black. That's the same thing that modern scholars are saying. And more or less of the texture of wool. Same thing the modern scholars are saying. With a black skin of various shades, a dark eyes, a flat face, depressed nose, jutting jaws, thick lips, and large mouth with oblique and scissor teeth. Right? So this is the same thing that we're seeing modern evidence to be saying, right? This is the same thing that we're seeing, right? So let's look here. To the people of Europe, both of antiquity and the Middle Ages, the Negro was as little known as the Hindu or the Chinese, but he was immorally known to the Egyptians, the Jews, the Arabs, and the Persians, most probably always as a slave, right? Most probably always as a slave. And that's not true, but that's okay because the Israelites were slaves in all these same locations that it is placing the Jews, right? The Negroes were slaves, rather. The Negroes were slaves in these very same places. Let's continue. Now, I told you, the aspect of Negro land would be brought back up. Now, Negro land was associated with the Hyksos, and the Hyksos, according to history and prophecy, are associated according to Roman Jewish historian and the historian Manetho, and and Pharaoh Kamos, that's associated to be Negroes, right? Negroes, right? So let's look at Negro land, okay? Negro land, right, is an archaic term in European mapping, referring to European descriptions of West Africa as an area populated with Negroes. So again, if you had any other thought that Negro land would be anything other than a land of Negroes, I don't know what to tell you. This area comprised at least the western part of the region called Sudan, not to be confused with the modern country. The term is probably a direct translation of the Arabic term Bilad as-Sudan, meaning land of the blacks, corresponding to about the same area. There were various kinds of people in that area. The Persians called these areas Zangistan, meaning land of the blacks, and the name Zang for black still remains to the name of Zanzibar. So they're saying it's various peoples, and even though it says here it's populated with the land of Negroes, and we just looked at some evidence from about 150 to 200 years ago saying what Negroes would be looking like in their ethnic features, and we looked at historical evidence and modern evidence to see what their historical features would have been like, and we see the exact same things. But that's fine, right? We're just going to read the evidence, whether they're for or against what has been commonly and has been consistently shown, right? Zang for black still means the name of Zanzibar from Persia, meaning the coast of blacks. The name was given by Persian navigators when they visited the area in the Middle Ages, right? So let's look more at Negro land, right? The Slave Coast, the Gold Coast. This is the area that Negroes would have been taken from, right? Okay, so just giving you a closer look at this map. This is 17, right? This map comes from 1729, titled Negro Land in Guinea, with the European settlements explaining what belongs to England, Holland, Denmark, right? So this map is by H. Maul. He was a geographer during this time, around 1729. So this guy depicted the land of the Negroes during the transatlantic slave trade. So remember, the transatlantic slave trade, according to the history books, officially started around 1619, right? That's when they say, all right? Now, this map comes from 1729. In 1729, this is depicting where the Negroes are, Let's see if there's any other maps that says that this is where Jews and Israelites are. Oh, no. This is about to really be an eye-opener, an eye-shocker to a lot of people when you see that maps from the 1729 era showing Negro land, and we have maps of the same era showing that this is all inhabited with Jews. And that fits historical evidence of Jews having Negro ancestry and being of Negro origin. We're going to talk about how and why the Jews would have gotten over here in the first place. Let's continue. Now, I understand that me being a black man, you think that there may be bias to this, and that's okay, even though I'm coming with nothing but evidence. So let's go no further, but before we examine what Cambridge University has to say, because Cambridge University is way smarter than some black man on YouTube. Okay, Cambridge University says Jewish populations were in West Africa, aka Negro land, before and during the transatlantic slave trade. So let's look at this source, right? Let's look at this source. Black Jews, the religious challenge, or politics versus religion. This is written by Ulysses Santa Maria, right? Ulysses Santa Maria. Let's look at page 231 and what he had to say. This is in the European Journal of Sociology archives, right? So let's go. Let's go. It is well known that 1500 years before Islam, Judaism, which is the worship of the Jews, right, was present in Africa. Traveler tales and stories of journeys across North Africa, the Sahara, and Sudan, that's Negro land, this is Negro land, provide considerable evidence. This is Cambridge University, guys. Considerable evidence of the existence of Jewish communities on the African continent. We know that from the time of St. Jerome, from 340 to 420, a chain of Jewish commercial towns stretched almost uninterrupted from Mauritania to India. St. Augustine learned Hebrew in Tenzin, where there was a Judeo-Syrian colony which came from Caesarea. These groups went as far as Akkar in the southern Sahara, and according to the Chronicles of Sudan, the dynasty of the kings of Ghana originated in this group, so that the kings of Ghana originated from Jewish ancestry, from Jewish populations. A Negro people descended and originated from Jewish populations, according to this Cambridge University source. That's interesting. Jewish contacts and influences with Black Africa were also noted by Arab geographers Ibn Khordadbeh and El Bekri, who stated that the routes of the trans-Saharan trade, in which Jewish caravans and interpreters were involved, culminated in Ghana. So let's look at page 232, right? But what about the south of this margin of Sahara contacts in the reign of John II of Portugal, right? In the reign of John II of Portugal, nearly 700 Jews were taken from their kin and deported to the island of Sao Tome. And we're going to look at this island. This island is on the coast of West Africa, where the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade were taken, right? On the west coast of Africa. This island is close to Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. Escaping from Sao Tome, the Jews immigrated to the coast of Angola between 1484 and 1499. This would have been before the transatlantic slave trade. This is saying Black Jews would have been where? In West Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. They must have settled in several Portuguese colonies and over the centuries mixed with the indigenous Black population. Near the Congo and Gabon in 1776, Black Jews called Bavombo or even Mavombo, Mayomba, May, or Mavumbu lived on the coast of Luango by the river named Rio Muni. It would seem that they adopted Christianity at the same time as maintaining their Judaism, right? So John II, called the Perfect Prince, was the king of Portugal in 1481 until his death in 1495. We're going to look at more evidence coming from this period. Please don't, we will look at more evidence in this period. I hope you're awake. I hope you're taking notes. Before we look more at this evidence, I got to show you. I know a lot of you don't know. A lot of you may not be, that great with geography. Understand, right, where it says Niger here, right? Niger River. This is Negro land. This was depicted as Negro land during the time of the transatlantic slave trade, right? During the time of the transatlantic slave trade, right? Now, the Cambridge University source says that there were Jewish populations in this area that originated, right? Historical evidence says that they were deported from Portugal and Spain on this island here, Sao Tome, that you see. Look at the cursor, Sao Tome. I even put a circle around it. This is off the coast of West Africa. The source also said that they migrated over here to Gabon, to Cameroon, over here in Ghana, Nigeria, and that these would have been Jewish populations before the transatlantic slave trade. Black Jews existed here before the transatlantic slave trade. Let's continue. Right, back with the same source. Back with the same source. Black Jews, the religious challenge of politics versus religion. By 1847, David Livingstone discovered a map of a group of educated blacks living in the interior, some 200 miles from the coast of Luando. These blacks were called the Jews of Angola. West Africa, guys, exactly where the descendants of the transatlantic slave trade came from. They were Jews. What was your history before the transatlantic slave trade? Are you a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade? Did you know that millions of people were taken from West Africa, where they have maps and oral history saying that this is the land of black Jews? Let's continue. They were good merchants, learned easily, and had knowledge of Portuguese law and history. They were often, why? Because they were deported. They were often employed as clerks and writers. For Livingstone, there was no doubt but that these people were the descendants of those who had been deported from Portugal in the 15th century, the Jews that had been deported to that area. They were black. Other evidence supports his intuition. In savage Africa, Winwood Reade writes of having met in Guinea, right? Guinea was denoted in that map of Negro land, directly under Negro land. It's a part of Negro land, right? It is a part of Negro land. He had met, meeting in Guinea, blacks claiming to be Portuguese around 1864. Closer to our time, Dr. J. Kreppel noted sometime after the First World War that a large community of black Jews existed in the interior of Dahomey. This is where a lot of descendants of the transatlantic slave trade come from, black Jews. These Jews had the 5 books of Moses written on old parchment in Hebrew. So the people who want to say, right, there is no evidence that Jews were black. There is no evidence that descendants of the transatlantic slave trade could be the Israelites of today. The same area that our ancestors were taken from is the same area that there is historical and oral evidence that they had the books of Moses written in the language Hebrew, the language that the Bible was originally written in. We had it. Our descendants had it, right? All these disparate elements are evidence of the permanent presence of a Jewish tradition within African ethnic groups, which had at one time been in contact with the Jews who came from the were converted and had kept faith and their way of life, right? So continue to look at this source from Cambridge University. The study of customs and rites and the analysis of the semantics of these African tribes have led many of their observers to propose some hypotheses and even to draw some conclusions, right? Dr. Alan H. Goadby, we're going to look at some maps and stuff from him, reached the following conclusion. These factors have a very specific significance if we consider the presence of Judaism among the American Negroes. Hundreds of thousands of slaves were transported to America from West Africa during the trade which started some 400 years ago. What traces of Judaism still remained among the Negroes of West Africa at that period? To the extent that they were persecuted, they were more likely than other Negroes to be seized during wars and sold as slaves. It is virtually certain that many part of Jewish Negroes were among those sent as slaves, right, to America, right, to America. Let's look at it. How many of them would have been able to conserve some Jewish customs is another question. These, right, they were put in harsh slavery. The transatlantic slave trade was a very disgusting, very harsh, very brutal slavery, where its descendants and its people were forced out of their religions, their customs, and everything that they had known previously was stripped from them, right? Let's continue, right? This conclusion put forward by Goadby, which argues for the existence of a more or less recurrent Judaism in West Africa in the same places as those from which the Negroes were taken, is shared by others, such as Maurice Della Fossa. But most significantly, it has been adopted by a class of educated Black Americans. Hey, that's me, right? Right? Let's continue. Let's go into our next source. All right, I told you that we would look at some maps from Alan H. Goadby, right? He was a part of that that last source that we just saw. Allen H. Goby of Missouri was a Methodist minister, Methodist historian and teacher, writer, and scholar in the field of the Old Testament, Hebrew history, archaeology, and semantics. He was a professor at Duke University, right? He was a professor at Duke University. So let's look at what he had depicted right over here. Let's look at what he depicted over here on the next couple slides, right? Let's read the bottom. Yemen Jews and Falasha Berber, and Falashas Berber, Moorish, and Negro Jews, right? The names in red in the northern Sahara are ones in which some Berber Judaism survives. It is estimated about 1,500 Jews are scattered throughout the interior. Other names in red are places of ancient Jewish colonies. In some cases, our approximate date of settlement is added, right? So this guy, right? This guy, he lived in, right, towards after the transatlantic slave trade, after it ended. He's depicting maps of West Africa and maps of Africa in general, and he's going to show you exactly, right? This Duke professor is going to show you exactly where Jewish colonies and Jewish lands existed in West Africa after, before, and during the transatlantic slave trade. So I want you guys to zoom in if you have to, right? So over here we see the Jewish kingdom of Granada is depicted. Now when we looked at that other source, it talked about that the kings of Ghana must have and might have descended from ancient Jewish populations, right? So this map is going to depict the same thing. And right here you see that the Jewish kingdom of Ghana is depicted near the coast of West Africa, right? In Negroland. In Negroland. So please remember that map of Negroland was created around the 1700s, right? The map of Negroland was created around the 1700s, which depicted Negroes inhabiting this area. Look at what I'm drawing. This area was inhabited by Negroes around the 1700s, right? Then we had a source saying that John II of Portugal deported Jews here. Look at this. This is Sao Tome, where Jews were deported in the 1400s, right? So this map coming from the late 1800s would have depicted where the Jews came from here and where they were scattered throughout here, right? Here we see Levite cities, right? Remember that Levi was a son of Jacob. He was an Israelite. So there are populations of the children that descended from Levi, the Israelite, here in West Africa. This says Beni Ephraim. That means Beni means son of. So the sons of Ephraim. Ephraim was also a descendant of Jacob, a descendant of the Israelites. He is an Israelite. Populations of his descendants are noted here around the 1800s. More Levite cities. It says Dahomey Jews. Remember what we read about the Dahomey Jews that were depicted. It says Jewish traces here near Sierra Leone. Mediterranean Jewish population here. The Jewish kingdom of Granada, Qamlam, once a Jewish colony, depicted here. Right, look at this. It says Yahwism, Talbid Jews over here, right? Hebrews over here. Then you have more depictions. Beni Musa, son of Moses, over here. More Jewish populations are depicted in that same period before, during, and after the transatlantic slave trade, showing that these Negroes were Jewish. Let's keep going. Right, so you can pause the video. Right, here's a good time for you to pause the video and get a closer look at the map of West Africa. But we're going to move on. You pause and take a closer look. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say. History of the Jews in Ghana. The history of the Jews of Ghana, previously known as the Gold Coast, dates back several centuries. Several centuries. Jews being in Ghana. Several centuries. Right? Many of us, descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, have Ghana ancestry, Negro ancestry from Ghana. The contemporary Jewish community is small. Oh, really? That map did not look small. And mostly composed of foreign residents. The House of Israel, a community of aspiring converts, has begun to emerge in recent decades. Right? So this is what Wikipedia has to say. But we've looked at some way greater sources than Wikipedia. Some more primary sources than Wikipedia. Cambridge University, right? Professors from Duke University. But that's okay, right? Let's just continue. Again, Let's take another pause here. Take a pause and really look at this map. If you care about the evidence, pause the video right now, right? Take a moment of silence if you need to. See if these populations of West African Jews seem like a small community to you. All right, so we're taking a look at some modern scholarship of what modern scholarship has to say about the population and history of ancient Egypt and the DNA history, right? Let's get into some DNA history. Some of you won't believe until we get into that, right? Some DNA history. So you can pause the video and look at the rest of this, right? For time constraints, I need you guys to pause and look at this. Maybe in further videos we can further break a lot of this down. But I'm gonna go directly to the DNA evidence, which comes from the exact same region that the Hyksos, also known as the Negro Asiatic people that Pharaoh Kamos wrote about. That's where they would have dwelt. That's where the Israelites would have dwelt in this time period. Remember, we have to specify the time period. Many different cultures and many different people have overtaken and been in and out of Egypt. But the Bible puts the Israelites in a period of Egypt at a certain time point. So let's read, right? Sonia Zakrowski, right? This is a very, very prestigious archaeologist. You guys really need to look at her. Archaeologist and geneticist and DNA specialist who wrote in 2003. She studied skeletal samples from the Barbarian people in the Middle Kingdom in Upper Egypt. The raw data suggested that the ancient Egyptians in that area in general had tropical body plans, but that their proportions were actually super negroid. I know, I hope a lot of you have seen that meme where it says super nigga, right? Super negroid. DNA evidence and skeletal evidence. What are we to do with this raw data? What are we supposed to do with this, right? I will let you decide, but this comes from the same period in the same region that the Israelites would have been dwelling in Egypt. And this is not oral evidence anymore. This is genetic and skeletal DNA evidence. Let's continue. All right, again, I want you guys to make sure you're pausing the video. There's so much evidence that we're going through. If you can, pause the video and read through this, what Wikipedia had to say. This is some of the other writings that some modern historians and modern scholars have to say about their 2 cents on population history of Egypt and DNA evidence. You can continue to read on down. Some is counter evidence and some is proactive and evidence that goes along with what we read so far. I did want you to be able to see some of those counter arguments that are listed here, right? And you can continue to go through some of this. Let's continue on. All right, so let's look at the source. The Jew and Negro, a study of Jewish ancestry by Arthur T. Abernathy, Mr. PhD. This was published in 1910, right? So this is what it says in the preface. For those who perceive a difference in the capabilities of the Negro as compared with the Jew of today, the author recommends a more extensive study of the conditions of the Negro than may be procured from the observations of the American Negro alone. Let's jump down. Besides, the American Negro has but lately emerged from slavery. He has known only the soil, while his more fortunate kinsman, the Jew, has from his early nomadic disposition acquired the languages and arts of the traveler and tradesman, has trafficked in merchandise where his wits have been more sharpened. So this source right here is saying that the Negro is kinsman to the Jew. He's a kinsman of the Jew. See what Romans 9:3-4 says. For I could wish that myself were cursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, so genetic and DNA ancestry by the flesh, who are Israelites. So the kinsmen of Paul, the kinsmen of the biblical writer Paul, are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of God. These are Jews. This source is saying that the American Negro is also kinsman of the Jew, which would make us kinsmen of Paul. Let's read here, page 11, right? Okay, the effort of the author is to prove herein by evidence from history showing the intermingling of the Jewish race with those of other races, and these in turn will still other races together, forming a miscellaneous intermingling of racial affinities, that the Jew of today, as well as his ancestors in other times, is the kinsman and descendant of the Negro, holding the Negro's features, his ethnic features and characteristics through the long years of racial transmutations. And I might add, in spite the Jewish intermarriages into other races, which fact is so thoroughly established through history. So this source is saying, even though these people had multiple interactions and multiple mixings with other nations, they maintained their Negro features and characteristics, these Jewish people. So this is more from the Jew and Negro by Arthur T. Abernathy, a study of the Jewish ancestry. Let's look at more, right? Page 13. The original Jew and Negro were then descended from the same father, which would be Jacob. The evidence of intermarriage and affinity you mentioned is a universal phenomenon in the close affinity between Hamitic and Semitic speech, and between the northern Hamitic people and the Shemites shows close relationship, as you surmise. Page 14 right here. Page 14 right here, right? These are the conclusions to which I have come. By the way, the same Mediterranean race I find has survived in India, where it has early percolated. The Brenchman caste seems to be very pure, but the lower castes are more or less broad-headed Asiatic aborigines. Aryans are all gone, only their speech being left as evidence that they once conquered the land. It would be better to say that the Negro descended from the ancient Jewish type or Mediterranean race. It is hardly correct ethnically to reverse the sentence, right? So the Negro comes from ancient Jews. The Negro comes from ancient Jews. Not that ancient Jews are from modern Negroes. The modern Negroes come from ancient Jews, ethnically. Ethnically. Right, let's continue, man. Let's continue. All right, page 19. Right. Divide the human species into three great types or races known as the Black, Ethiopian, or Negro, the Yellow Turanian or Mongolian, and the White Caucasian. So why did I pull that? This source is noting that Ethiopians and Negroes in times past were assimilated with the same type of people and the same type of features. Why is this important? Well, understand that the sons of Moses come from an Ethiopian woman. Moses, an Israelite, had children with an Ethiopian, and his descendants went on to have descendants. So Ethiopian blood is present also among the Negroes and present in ancient Egypt, right? So let's look at what the book of Jeremiah 13:23 has to say. This is God. Can the Ethiopian change his skin, right? We're talking about ethnic stuff. So the Ethiopian is black, right? He's black. And this source is saying the same thing. Can the Ethiopian change his skin, right? Now, if the Ethiopians and the ancient Israelites mixed together, the ancient Israelites and the modern Israelites, which have retained their features, would also have Negro, Ethiopian, and black features, right? Right? Or the leoparded spots. Then may ye also do good that are accustomed to evil. Amos 9:7. Let's continue to see if the Bible associates Ethiopians with the children of Israel, with the Israelites. Are ye not as children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel, saith the Lord? Have not I brought up Israel out of the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Captor, and the Syrians from Ker? Wow. We got that map of Negro land back over here. You already know we got that map of Negro land back over here. Right, so this is Egyptians and Ethiopians, Color, Race, and Racism by David H. Kelly, Montclair State College, Montclair, New Jersey University. Right, so this source is talking about ancient Egypt, religion, and ethnic stuff that we find in ancient Egypt, culture, all of that. So let's look at what it has to say here. A distinctly contrary view is provided by the ancient Greeks themselves. So this is what ancient Greeks had to say. Herodotus, that's a very prestigious ancient Greek. Aristotle, very prestigious ancient Greek. Plato and Socrates and others, those are very prestigious ancient Greeks. Some of whom journeyed to Africa to study under African teachers, freely acknowledge their debt to the Egyptians, whom Herodotus described as having thick lips, broad noses, woolly hair, and being burnt of skin as the right? That comes from primary sources of Greek culture. So again, that Negro presence is indeed found in ancient Egyptians and found in those Egyptian populations. So you cannot say that there was no Negro presence in ancient Egypt, right? You can't say that. That's not historical. That's not supported by our scholarly evidence. It's just not, right? You cannot lie, right? So let's look at this, right? Let's look at this. Around 1442, the Portuguese first arrived in southern Africa while trying to find a sea route in India. The term Negro, literally meaning black, was used by the Spanish and Portuguese as a simple description to refer to the Bantu peoples, right? The Bantu peoples also go to the ancient Israelites that they encountered. Negro denotes black in Spanish and Portuguese, derived from the Latin word Niger, meaning black, which itself is probably from a Proto-Indo-European root to be dark, akin to night. Negro was also used for the peoples of West Africa in old maps labeled Negroland, an area stretching along the Niger River. From the 18th century to the late 1960s, Negro was considered to be proper English language term for a people of black African origin. According to Oxford dictionaries, use of the word now seems out of date or even offensive to British and U.S. English. A specifically female form of the word negress was occasionally used. However, like Jewess, it has completely fallen out of use. Negroid was used within physical anthropology to denote one of the three purported races of humankind, alongside the Caucasoid and the Mongoloid. The suffix oid means similar to. Negroid as a noun was used to designate a wider or more generalized category than Negro, right? So, as an adjective, it qualified as a noun, for example, Negroid features. So what we're purporting and saying here is that through proof, through archaeological and scholarly evidence, the Israelites would have left Egypt and would have remained throughout history. They would have retained Negroid features at large, right? At large. Let's continue. If you thought we didn't have more maps and more evidence proving that where descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, where they were taken from, shows history of Israelite presence and Jewish present, ancient Jewish presence. Let's look at this map from Emanuel Bowen, right? Emanuel Bowen. He lived from 1694 to 1767, so this map is dated in that time period. Was a Welsh map engraver who achieved the unique distinction of becoming the royal map maker to both King George II of Great Britain and Louis of France. So this guy was a royal map maker, right? A royal map maker to these prestigious kings. Bowen was highly regarded by his contemporaries for producing some of the largest, most detailed, and most accurate maps of his era. He is known to have worked with most British cartographic figures of the period, including John Owen and Herman Mall. So this guy is a very prestigious guy, and this is one of his maps that we are going to take a look at here at the next slide. Let's see if this has anything to do with Jews on his map in West Africa. All right, so remember where he would have made this map between the late 1600s and between the middle 1700s is when Bowen would have made this map. What do we see here encircled, right? We see Negro land up here, and right under that we see the kingdom, KM means kingdom, of Judah. Now, Judah is a son of Jacob, right? The kingdom of Judah, right? And you can read about the kingdom of Judah all throughout the Bible. They are the Israelites. So, the kingdom of Judah is depicted on the slave coast, right at the slave coast. This is a kingdom of Israelites, descendants of Israel, that were found off the coast of West Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. This comes during the same period of the transatlantic slave trade, much like the other map. Again, take a closer look. Look up the kingdom of Judah in your spare time. Go read your Bible. Learn who God's chosen people are. Did you know that Christ came from the kingdom of Judah? Did you know that Christ descended from the tribe of Judah, right? right? So ancient historians depicted this map. They spelled it Weda, also Judah. So Judah, Judah. All right, next piece of scholarly evidence. We have the Encyclopedia of Missions, which was written and published in 1904. Now, I'll let you guys continue to research what the Encyclopedia of Missions is. Now, let's take a look here at what it has written about Dahomey. Remember, we talked about the Dahomey Jews on the map depicted by Alan Goby around the 17, which was a map depicting the populations that were around the 1700s till the late transatlantic slave trade time period. Now, it says Dahomey. Let's go ahead and get a pointer on here for you guys. Dahomey, formerly an independent Negro kingdom, now a colony of France, situated on the Gulf of Guinea, so this is near Negro land, between Togoland on the west and Lagos and Nigeria on the east. In 1900, the boundaries were extended on the north to join the French military territories in the western Sudan. It comprises about 60,000 square miles and has a population roughly estimated at 1 million, mostly Negroes of the Ewe family. Now, when you look at the Ewes, right, it's very interesting that you'll see, genetic studies and historical studies, and we'll lead into this on further documentaries, right? Maybe I'll do a part 2, right? These Ewes go back to the Jews. I don't know if it's that hard to see the connection there. The Ewes go back to the Jews, right? The Ewe family. The climate is very unhealthful. The soil remarkably fertile. Cotonou, the best harbor on the coast, has been chosen as the terminus of a railway now constructed to open up the interior. The chief coast town is Weda. Now, remember when we looked at that map by Alan Goby, Weda is also called Judah. And now it's also depicted on Bowen's map. It's called the Kingdom of Judah, or Weda, right? It's the same thing, right? Because there were descendants of the tribe of Judah there who established a colony, right? It was formerly a slave port, now exporting great quantities of palm oil. So this is where many of the slaves from the transatlantic slave trade were taken, right? They were taken from an area where mostly Negroes dwelt. Look at this size, the populations of these people, where mostly Negroes dwelt, and they have history going back to the Jews. And we will further examine this Ewe family and further research, right? Not in this video, but maybe going forward in the future, Lord willing. Let's continue. Just taking a quick look back at that map from Alan Goby, we see, right, the Dahomey Jews depicted on this map that would have taken place during the transatlantic slave trade. Again, guys, look at this. This is where descendants of this transatlantic slave trade come from. These areas, which maps during the transatlantic slave trade tell us, right, that our history goes back to Jewish kingdoms. Look at this. Dahomey Jews. Dahomey Jews. About 1 million Dahomey Jews were spotted in this area. So this is not a small population, especially if we can see Dahomey Jews, which were Negroes, in the same area where Negroes dwelt, Negro land. And we also see that these other areas are called Jewish kingdoms and Jewish colonies and Levite cities. I mean, this is something serious. Even over here, we see Beni Ephraim, right? Now, many Israelites will tell you that the 10 tribes were already taken to America during this time period. They were already in America before the transatlantic slave trade. Now, here on my channel at Repent for Yah, I don't necessarily believe that, but we will continue to examine that evidence in videos to come. This is very significant that we see Beni Ephraim, one of the main tribes of the 10 tribes of Israel, here during and before the transatlantic slave trade. And there's an oral history that matches up with the Yoruba people that we'll take a quick look at. Like I said, that'll be for further videos. We're just taking a quick look at evidence of why and how and when Negroes, also referenced as Jews, were in West Africa. Right, I know some of you may think this evidence is not important, but it is, because in American school systems and even in other school systems where Negroes are oppressed and have been descendants of the transatlantic slave trade and other slave trades that we see the Israelite peoples have gone in, right? They are not teaching us our history. When were you ever taught that the same area that West Africans were taken from had prevalent history of Jewish tradition, of Israelite history? You never knew that, right? And it's hidden in these books. A lot of these books cost thousands of dollars, right? Some of us are only able to access these books through our universities. That's how I got these books and some of these sources, right? So let's just look here, because I know some of us didn't learn in school. The number of people carried off from Africa reached 30,000 per year in the 1690s and 85,000 per year a century later. More than 8 out of 10 Africans forced into the slave trade crossed the Atlantic between 1700 and 1850. Remember, those maps were made during that time period, and some of these scholarly articles that we looked at were from during that same time period, talking about Jews in West Africa with Negroid features, Negro features, being referenced as Negroes, called Negroes, looking like Negroes, mating and making descendants with Negroes, right? The decade 1821 to 1830 saw more than 80,000 people a year leaving Africa in slave ships, well over a million more. 1/10 of those carried off in the slave trade era followed within the next 20 years. By 1820, nearly 4 Africans for every 1 European had crossed the Atlantic. About 4 out of every 5 women who crossed the Atlantic were from Africa. The majority of enslaved Africans brought to British North America arrived between 720 and 1780. Africans carried to Brazil came overwhelmingly from Angola. This is the same place where the black Jews dwelt. That's where most of the Africans. So if you're in Brazil, Lord willing, we'll be able to get this in Portuguese someday. Brothers and sisters out there in Brazil, fellow descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, you come from the same place where the Jews were dwelling before and during the transatlantic slave trade. Africans carried to North America, right, including the Caribbean, left mainly from West Africa, also depicted as Negro land with heavy and large Jewish populations, right? Well over 90% of enslaved Africans were sent to the Caribbean and South America. Only about 6% of African captives were sent directly to British North America, right? So here's what we have to understand, guys. If this history is true, the oral, scholarly, and archaeological evidence is true, right? And we do see Israelite history in West Africa before the transatlantic slave trade. Everyone who descends through the paternal line of those descendants has a very high likelihood of being Israelites. Millions of Israelites that hold genetic and Negroid features according to history, not conjecture. But let's continue. I apologize, guys. Again, I know we're already running long here, but look, we're examining evidence, and I can promise you, right, as I made this video, guys, I've left out over 40 pieces of scholarly evidence, maps, and cultural history, linguistic history. Like I said, we're going to make another one of these. We have much more evidence to go into, and we have to continue going into the evidence of some of the 10 tribes, right, that I mentioned earlier. So this is Calamay's Dictionary of the Holy Bible. Over here, we have Antoine Augustin Calamay. He was born in 1672, died in 1757. Again, so this, I'm pulling a scholar, again, during specific time periods. I'm not just pulling you and showing to you any and every kind of evidence. I'm showing you evidence from very specific time periods matching up with people, the people of God. Right. So let's read here. The existence of the Hebrews as a people distinct from all others to this day is a miracle of that indisputable kind which may well justify a few remarks. They are spread into all parts of the earth. You read the book of Deuteronomy, God said he would scatter our people, right, because of us failing to keep his law, statutes, and commandments and adhere to the traditions that he had given to us, the heritage that he had given to us, which is the law of Moses, right, written by God himself. Okay, let's continue. But to the utmost extremity of Asia, even in Tibet and China, they abound in Persia, northern India, Tartary, wherever our travelers have penetrated. These are, as they assert, probably descendants of the tribes carried away captive by the Assyrian monarchs. Now I'm going to show you guys something about these Assyrian monarchs in just a second, and evidence of Negroes being descendants of the Israelites, the Hebrews, from the Assyrian period, right? That goes into the 10 tribes. We're just going to briefly touch on it, right? They are also numerous, the Israelites, the Hebrews, numerous in Arabia, in Egypt, and throughout Africa, right? So this is further proof, right? Further proof. Now look, let's see what it says here. These dispersions are of different epochs. Some were voluntary, others were forced. So some of these migrations of the Israelite and who would be the Negro people, as far as the evidence of this video has shown so far, some of that has been voluntary, some of it has been involuntary through captivity, right, and through dispersion, right, through us migrating to escape various things. Egypt from the days, right, that many Hebrews settled in Egypt from the days of Solomon is very credible. So, right, even from the days of Solomon and before Solomon with the children of Israel in Egypt, we saw a presence of God's chosen people, the Israelites, in Africa. The same place where God told Jacob he would make a great nation of him. In Africa, a black land, right? That's Egypt. Let's continue. All right, so just a quick look at this. So this is a map, right? This map depicts the great migration of refugees from the collapsing Assyrian Empire, 605 BC, according to the Yoruba tradition. Now, if you read the book of Ezra, the book of Ezra says that Salmanasar carried the 10 tribes of Israel. This is after Solomon's kingdom was split, right? You had the kingdom of Judah, right? And you had the house of Israel, right? The Israelites separated in 2 separate kingdoms. Now, according to the book of Ezra, the prophet Ezra stated that Salmanasar carried the 10 tribes, so 10 of the tribes of the lineages from Jacob were taken into Assyria. Now, looking at this map shows, according to Yoruba tradition, this is showing their migration into West Africa. Now, the Yoruba are a group of Negroes, right? Now, the Yoruba are over here. Now, understand that they say that they migrated here after 605 BC, from the collapsing Assyrian Empire. Now, the last source said that the Hebrews, right? The Hebrews had migrations from the Assyrian empires. Now, if you read the book of Ezra, it says that they entered into the river Euphrates, which is right here, right? They entered into the river Euphrates, and they came out, right? And they journeyed for over a year. Now, this is the Yoruba tradition matching up with the Bible. Now, like I said, some people disagree. We're just briefly touching over this. Even if you don't believe, what's to point out here is that it is Yoruba oral tradition. Look at Ghana over here, that they settled over here from around 605 BC. So the Jews that we saw getting transported from Portugal, right, before the transatlantic slave trade around 1409 in Sao Tome, which is under the West African coast, right? It's saying that they came and mixed with the populations that were up here after that. Well, if the Yoruba tradition is true, and they are Israelites that came from the Assyrian Empire, that means the people that the Jews mixed with when they were deported from Portugal and from Spain around the early 1400s, the people that they mixed with here weren't just regular Africans. They were mixing back with their same people over here, Jewish descendants, right? Israelite descendants that lived here apparently from 605 BC, right? That's just, hey, that's what they say. Now, it's very important because if they are from the 10 tribes of Israel, it's very interesting that the map that we see from Alan H. Goldby says that the sons of Ephraim are located exactly right here where the Yoruba have themselves located. Now, the children of Ephraim, also Israelites, they were a part of those 10 tribes that were carried away into Assyria. So that map from Alan H. Goldby depicts exactly where the Yoruba are saying that they would have settled, and they claim to be part of the 10 tribes that were carried away into Assyria and fled over here. But let's just continue. Like I said, we'll continue to examine that in further videos to come if you don't believe. Even some of you Israelites who believe otherwise. That's fine, right? So we're going to, we're going to look at a map. This is not oral tradition. This is a actual map from Charles Valency. It shows a vindication of the ancient history, right? Ancient history of Ireland, right? They're showing ancient history as pertains to them and what anything has to do with them, right? Charles Valency, page 46 through 47. Now, Charles Valency was a British military officer, and he was a surveyor sent to Ireland, right? Now, he was born during that same time period around the transatlantic slave trade. Let's see what his map depicts. It depicts North Africa and the Israelite migrations. Charles Valency shows the Israelite migrations. So look at this, right? I want you to understand that the Yoruba tradition has them coming from Assyria, which would be over here, right? Assyria, and going down into the river and coming all the way over here to West Africa. Look, oh look, this map also depicts the Yoruba following that same map of oral tradition that the Yoruba people themselves have, that they are Negroes who came here from this time period. So it would seem that the Israelite migrations put them in West Africa, going back all the way to about 605 years before Christ. I mean, if that's true, listen, if that is true, I'm not telling you distinctively that it is, but we have a lot of history and evidence here of Jewish populations being here, at the very least, right? If even if we don't want to believe this evidence, which you don't have to, at the very least, there is substantial evidence that they were in West Africa, specifically around in and around Negro land, before the transatlantic slave trade, and that Jewish colonies were all throughout in those same areas, right? So let's just continue. Hey, Israelites in Africa. I did not draw this. Repent for y'all. Did not draw this. The Israelites did not draw this. Some, white man in Ireland. This is what he's got to say. All right, now let's see what your Google search has to say. The majority of African Americans have a significant portion of their DNA originating from West Africa. Again, if you didn't know that, now you know, right? Now you know. Specific populations. Within West Africa, ethnic groups like the Yoruba, the Mende, and the Igbo are often identified as prominent sources of ancestry for the African Americans, right? So the African Americans come from these populations. Now, if you look up the Igbo people today, are recognized by, the Jewish state of Israel today, right? Those would be European people claiming to be the Jews of today. Even they say that these black Negro Jews, the Igbo people, they count them as part of the tribes of Israel today. Now, African Americans prominently descend from this group of people, then there should be no question who the Israelites are today. They persist of people who were taken into the transatlantic slave trade, descendants of the Igbo, who even European Jews that live in Israel today recognize as being Israelites today. And the Yoruba, look at all the history that we have there, right? So look, genetic testing, ancestry DNA kits can help individuals identify their specific West African ancestry, right? If you want to go do these tests, right, you feel free to go ahead and to try to prove all things. Now, understand that patrilineal tests would be best. They are fallible, but understand that, we are just looking at the evidence here, and this is the evidence that we have. So let's look at some of the diaspora that took place from West Africa, right? People were taken into the to the Caribbeans. Look at all these places where descendants of West Africans come from, right? And were sent to. Look, the Igbos, right? Also known as the Jamaican Maroons. The Igbos, who were recognized as Israelites, as Jewish and ancestry within Jewish populations, they're called Jamaican Maroons. I mean, come on, guys. Look at this. Look at this. African Americans, African American Jews. Look, I mean, Seminoles, right? The Gula, and I promise you we're going to talk about the Gula. I have about an hour's worth video proving that the Gula who were called the African American Negroes of the southeast region of the United States, are recognized as Israelites. We got about an hour worth of information proving this historically and archaeologically. Please continue to, just be on watch. Just be on watch. The Yoruba people, I mean, all of these are descendants and progenitors of the transatlantic slave trade. All of these people have a very, 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 very high likelihood of being the Israelites according to history, archaeology, and prophecy, with Negro ancestry like the Negro Hyksos people that were depicted by some of the Negro pharaohs of Egypt. Let's go. Okay, so we have some genetic studies here from PubMed Central, National Library of Medicine, charting the ancestry of African Americans, right? That's this source here. You can read this. We're going to come here, right? The number of people of recent African ancestry living in the Americas is comparable to that in Africa itself, largely because of the forced mass migrations of the Atlantic slave trade during the 15th to 19th centuries. Historical documentation indicates that many Africans were taken from the West African coast. Come on now, this is exactly where the Jews were depicted in maps and through history and through scholarly evidence in that area. But that a large proportion were also taken from the former Portuguese colonies of Angola and Mozambique. Now remember, in the Portuguese colonies, right, were the deported black Jews. John II of Portugal, right, he deported these black Jews here to these colonies and into the island of Sao Tome. This is pure history. The perpetrators included the Portuguese, Spanish, and British, and it's estimated that they moved 12 million people, right, in 4 centuries. 12 million people that were in and around areas of black Israelite Jewish ancestry were taken from that specific area into the transatlantic slave trade, right? Let's continue, man. Let's continue. Let's just keep it pushing. I just want you, I want you to go back and look at that map, right? Of Alan H. Goby. Go back and look at the map of Professor Bowen and compare that to these transatlantic slave trade maps, right? Of where the majority of the people were being taken from. These areas are black Jewish populations, and you just can't get around it. Negro, Jew, Israelite populations found all throughout here, all throughout Negro land, all throughout Guinea, and we've shown that evidence. And there's a lot of evidence of that I didn't show for your sake, because this video would be too long. Right? We've got so much history. Why? Because the Bible is true. And let every man be a liar, but let the Bible and let all truth continue to reign and continue to come out. And we're bringing this thing out. Right? So we're wrapping up. Who are the Israelites of today, man? Who are the Israelites of today? Look at this map, man. Where have God's people been taken to? What do they look like historically, right? What are the depictions of them, right? In archaeology, what we have to continue to examine, and we will continue to examine the various slave trades of the Israelite, the Hebrew people in the Bible, and matching that up with real history as we've done here today, right? So I encourage you to continue to look forward to the videos to come. Please like, share, and subscribe, and share this video to people. This is where our people have been scattered, that we've been separated, destroyed, trodden down, right? And the reason we don't know how to come together anymore is because look how separated we've been. Look at where we come from and look how separated we've been. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 32, verse 26. I said I would scatter them into corners. I would make the remembrance of them to cease from among men. So the reason the Israelites lost their history, lost the ability to even prove their ancestry, is because God himself said that this would be a curse if they forgot his law, statutes, and commandments, if they stopped following him, if they listened to the other nations and fell after pagan worship and pagan practices. God said he would sell them into slavery, into all nations in all corners of the earth. We have to really examine What ethnic group of people in real life did that happen to? Is there any other race of people on this planet that have been scattered into all corners of this globe? You can find Negro ancestry in all the major populations on Earth, in all the major populations on Earth at some point in history and time. Only the Bible says that God would do that to his chosen people for their failure to obey to him. This video is so important, man. It's so important for you guys to tap in and to read the Bible, to keep God's law, statutes, and commandments, to follow after Christ, and to understand your history, because these things are mentioned in the Bible and they do matter. They do matter. And with that, I say shalom to all the lost sheep of the house of Israel.